Imagine having access to a tribe of mentors, experts in the biggest questions in tech. This is Making Revenue Tick.
So we've actually just finished recording the podcast. So Simon, for people who are just joining us now, what are they going to learn about in the next hour and a quarter?
Yeah, no, cheers, Richard. Really fun session. So the key things that you're going to learn is I've just gone through this 7-year journey from starting my organization, building it up, scaling it, really getting to that product market fit, keep refining that ideal customer profile, and then building out a go-to-market, a repeatable go-to-market journey. And how do you move on from that founder-led sales so that you do hand off and create that repeatable process? The other key things are, how do you build this culture within a startup and growth organization that lasts beyond that founder-led sales area? And when times get tough, how do you keep delivering that really strong culture? And how do you make sure you're hiring the right people through that culture? The other area that we really heavily talked about is for me to really deliver that triple digit growth was I went into the US really quickly, but not by putting people on the ground over there. So actually delivering that growth in the US and North American market, but from the UK. How do you support that team or those customers out in the US? The other thing is, how do you make sure you've got a blended go-to-market approach? Because in the early days, you might start with direct, but then how do you bring in the channel and partners into that to really accelerate your growth? And then the final tip, it's around how do you make sure you've got the right technology systems within your business that are the right scale for that business so you don't overspend. And the final bit that I just want to do is, from everything I've learned throughout my journey, if I knew back then what I know now, I really believe that I could probably shorten that journey by about 50%, but actually doubled the exit from what I just did.
Circle of life of a founder, from initial idea all the way through to successful exit, and then coming out even more motivated to do it faster and bigger and better next time. This is a masterclass. So everyone else, enjoy the episode. Hello and welcome to Making Revenue Tick. I am joined by a wonderful human being, someone who lives in the same part of the UK that I'm from, West Sussex man, Simon Black. Simon, how you doing?
Yeah, really good. Really good. Great to be on this as well, Richard.
No, I know we've had a couple of pre-conversations and we finally got around to recording. I know this is going to be an amazing conversation for the listeners. So thank you for coming on. What we're going to talk about is something that you've got a lot of lived experience of, which is this transition from being the founder, running everything, to scaling a global business that actually goes and does that thing that most businesses love to do if they're based anywhere outside the US, which is conquer the US market through expansion. Why is that a topic that's close to your heart?
Oh, it's because I've probably lived it and breathed it for the last 7 years. And I think the funny thing is we all talk about playbooks, which I will today, but no one talks about that playbook as that first-time founder, first-time CEO. And it was my first time ever running a business. It's the first time I've grown that business out to then break into the US. And it's the first time I've ever exited a business as well. So living that experience for the last 7 years has been amazing and equally terrifying in equal measures. And I just want to share some of those experiences, because if I can shortcut someone else's journey and double their exit value, that's what I want to do.
So we'll make the podcast that you wish you'd seen at the start of that journey. Okay, amazing. I love it because you've got that whole life cycle, right? From the idea, you literally, from here's an idea, let's go and take this thing into the world, all the way through to exit. So perfect. Well, let's share your experience. Talk me through. So for people who don't already have the opportunity to know you and your story. Tell us about what it was that you founded.
Yeah, so I've been in the technology sector for 20 plus years. So 7 and a bit years ago, but also two key founders, started a company called Awaken Intelligence. Um, and actually it came out of my chairman's vision. He'd worked in the contact center and CX space for about 20 years. And I think if any of you have ever been on the phone call to a contact center, to your bank, to an airline, to your insurance companies, it is probably one of the most frustrating experiences that you've ever had. And actually, that's where we went into. So we had technology solutions that we thought about that would enable an agent to really understand what the customers were talking about by listening to the conversation and then automatically enable them to come back with the perfect answer. So anytime you should get on to a contact center, it should make that journey simpler, quicker, more efficient. Um, and so we really wanted to fix that market. So Chris Robinson, myself, and Geoffrey Erasmus started this business back in 2018. Perfect timing, just before COVID. But talk about that in a bit more detail.
Yeah, exactly. The amount of people I know who started businesses just before COVID is phenomenal. But I'm speaking to the ones obviously that made it through, but I know a lot didn't. But you did make a business successful over a 7-year period. You got an exit. Tell us a bit about your history, because I know that one of the sort of common themes that comes through when people start businesses, they've got lived experience of the problem, or they've got some kind of exposure to foundational things within their career, within building businesses, within building teams, within working with technology, that gave them the kind of unique capabilities to be able to take an idea and then turn it into something that actually exists and scale. So what was it? Tell us about your history that created those foundational elements to be able to be ready to go and launch the business.
Yeah, if you look at my background, for probably the first 10 plus years of my career, I worked for large American technology companies, IBM, Tibco, Autonomy as well. So there's been a lot of press with Dr. Mike Lynch in the news. I worked for that organization for a number of years. And then in my latter 10 years, I worked in pre-IPO. So private companies, a lot smaller, didn't have that huge amount of resources behind them to be successful. And actually, and I'm probably the same as a lot of people in the tech sector, I always wanted to maybe run a company. And it was probably born out of me being managed by certain people that I thought I could do better than them. I thought that their management style maybe was a bit old fashioned. They were making me do things that I didn't think were the most efficient way of doing things. So throughout my years of working for either very good managers and thinking, okay, that's how I would love to look after a team, but also a lot of negative traits of managers and going, I don't ever want to run a business like that. So when I finally got the chance to run a business, I took all of those learnings from what worked, but also what didn't work. And I really wanted to be this different CEO that did things that everyone I'd learned from said this would be the perfect way. Um, and so often, I'll give a few examples. Some of my old CEOs or VP of sales were just so standoffish. They would hide away in their office. They didn't build that great culture of a team, and they were very dogmatic. And I think, especially now, the younger generation, they really want to understand why someone's asking them to do something. They really want to understand what's the end game of this before they start doing it. And honestly, throughout my whole history, I've been one of those irritating, inquisitive people that whenever there's anything and anyone's talking about something, my hand's the first one to go up to ask a question. So I am that irritating person that asks hundreds of questions. but it means that I want to learn about something before I do something. So when I came into Awaken Intelligence, I really set out the stall of it needed to be a really strong cultural foundation within the business. Um, I also wanted a rule, and so did my other fellow directors, that there's going to be no arseholes in this business. So we had a very strict thing whenever we hired anyone, each director had a veto that they might be super qualified for the job, but if they weren't a good fit for the company, we're not going to hire them. Um, and the other thing is just clear communication. Um, Now, the one thing I would say is I say all these great things, and I think the bit that I was very naive about as a founder, as a first time CEO, the reason that maybe some of my old CEOs in the past um, exhibited some of these negative uh, attitudes that I talk about is probably because they'd had to live with building a company for many years. And I think you do get slightly tarnished that you and me internally have a real driving ambition to succeed and build a great team. And actually, there's a lot of people in your business that will also have those same values. Unfortunately, you'll also hire people that don't have those same values, which mean you have to put safeguards in place to make sure people are performing.
Hmm. This is really close to my heart as a topic of conversation. A couple of things you mentioned really stood out. I would like to come back. Well, let's talk about it now. So you being inquisitive is one. So I was thinking about the traits that make someone very successful in their career. And everyone says that curiosity is a superpower. But I think curiosity is quite a passive word. And there's a lot of very curious people who spend all their day speculating and going into rabbit holes, but not really taking action. And I think that gap between curiosity and inquisitiveness is that you take action based on the niggle and the quest to go deeper. And you ask those additional questions that other people might not ask. Where did that inquisitive behavior come from?
It's a really good question, actually. I think my parents have always trained me to try things, and they always encouraged me that actually, if I failed, that wasn't a negative thing. You have to keep trying till you're successful. So my father was an engineer, and he loved tinkering with things at home. And it also meant that if he was suddenly going to put in a whole new lighting system at home, he wouldn't bring someone in, he would do it. And I'd be like, in the early days, I'm like, "Oh, have you done this before?" And he's like, "No, but I'm an engineer, so how hard could it be?" And so he trained me like uh, if a washing machine went wrong, let's take it apart and understand bit by bit how we put it together. So my head, and the reason I went into technology space was probably twofold. One, I naturally get bored quite quickly. So I have to have things that are constantly interesting to me. And so technology is fantastic because things change every month, every 6 months, every 3 years. It's like a new world has started. So I love that. The second thing is I have to understand what I'm selling. I have to really understand the product so that I can, even as a CEO, I want to be able to demonstrate that to the customer. Because in the very early days, it said to me, if I can demonstrate something to a customer, they will go, God, it's easy to use. If even the CEO or the salesperson can show it to me, then actually we can use it. If it needs a very technical pre-sales person to demonstrate it, that can sometimes mean it's quite hard. So I always want to get into it to understand something before I ever try and sell it.
Yeah, I like that. It makes a lot of sense that based on our conversations that's how you would think, because it is kind of like you like to pull things apart to understand them at kind of like very first principles levels and then build. And you talked, what's interesting is when you were talking about some of the cultural elements that are important for you and some of the values that you held in high regard, but also the things that you stood against and you wanted to make sure that you avoided. They're all about culture within the business. And obviously we talked about the problem that you're solving in the market, and I still today, when I'm trying to resolve things, have the worst customer experiences when I contact centers. It's atrocious how they don't talk to each other. And so I get how big the problem is, but I want to just drill on that cultural piece. Tell us a bit more about those first principles that you built the culture from within the business.
So the funny thing is, because I smiled a bit earlier when you talked around the word curious, because the values that myself and the other directors put in place, they spelt a word. So we wanted something that we could create that wasn't just a mix of words. It was something that was very easy for everyone to remember, everyone to understand, and everyone to then bring into the organization. So we thought, let's talk about the key words that we wanted to live by. And then also let's have some fun to make sure it creates a word that we can build into our organization. And we came up with the word fabric. And we can then weave the fabric into the being of our company. And the words fabric stood for F for fun. We wanted to work really hard within the business, but we also wanted to have fun within the business. Because if we're working so hard and we're not having fun, people aren't going to stay within the company. But also, it wasn't just an inward facing thing, it was also an outward. We wanted to have fun with our customers. And if our customers had fun, they become more of a partnership, friends, rather than just acquaintances. The second piece, especially in a startup, was agility. So we needed to be agile. And that could be if a project that we're doing for our customer gets knocked off kilter, we've got to show agility to bring it back on track. But also, there were times in my startup where the route we were going down actually wasn't right. We could have spent another 6 months keep trying to go down that path, but actually we pivoted because we were agile very quickly and changed direction. And that became a success. Now, you've got to be careful that you're not just flip flopping all over the place, but as long as it is a well thought out pivot and agility, that's the right way to go. The next thing was be the best you can every day. And this comes to the heart of what I think with my employees is that not everyone's going to be the same level. If you think of that old school day when you're running the 100 meters, you're going to have everyone at different times. But that actually doesn't matter. If that individual does the best they can on that specific day, that's all you can ask for everyone. And you're only going to be as strong as your weakest player. So actually, you really want to encourage those weaker players to improve their capabilities. So we just ask everyone to be the best they can, but also get everyone else in the business to hold everyone accountable. So if someone really is just mucking about or just not putting their heart into a project, it shouldn't be the execs that always put up. It needs to be the other employees that asked to raise their standards up a bit. And then R is also take responsibility. And this comes back down to I don't mind if people fail. All I want is when they fail, they keep falling forward. They keep trying again and actually learn from their mistakes. So each time they're getting closer to success. Now, we don't want, obviously, the business just to permanently keep failing, but also what you don't want, and I've seen in many organizations, that it's such a dogmatic approach to management where everyone's terrified of making any decisions, that it just slows the whole business down. If you give everyone in the company a voice and they can all come up with suggestions, that is the way you really start becoming more efficient. And then I is integrity. And this comes back from my early days in the technology sector. There were too many times where integrity was just not held up to. And it could be that you're selling a solution, a partner's introduced you to that deal, and then because you need to hit your numbers, you actually cut the partner out to take that deal direct. Truly horrific. You see it a lot less now than you did back then, but you still see it now and then. I think that's just wrong. And the other thing is where in a subscription type SaaS business, there is no point signing up a customer unless they're going to be a long-term customer. So telling fibs and lies now to sign up a customer is actually not going to help us at all. I'd much prefer on my team to go, you know what, Mr. or Mrs. Customer, you're not right for us, and walk away than to sign up a customer that then churns in 1 year. So that integrity I built into the whole organization. And then the final one, which is why I chuckled, is curious. Now, I totally agree with your point of view. There is no point being curious for curious sake and then not delivering on it. But I also want my team to be curious on what do customers want? And also, if they're performing a process in the company and it's rubbish, actually hold their hand up and go, you know what? We shouldn't be doing it this way. I've been thinking, I think there's a better way to do it over here, and actually call out where there's inefficiencies within the
Mm.
business.
It's interesting. Oh yeah, I agree. I think curiosity is the base level, and then inquisitive is the next level. And it's almost like the C for you is like it's caring and curiosity. It's just caring about doing the right thing, caring whether you're adding value, caring about customers, and just it's a lot of empathy to put yourself in their shoes and ask those sorts of questions about it.
It is, and I think the other thing is to hold the company up to those values. We also did things like we'd have employees of the month, employees of the quarter, um, but we would get the company to vote for that, so that it was nothing to do with the leadership, because the leadership could pick people that they think have really helped the business. I actually want the employees to vote who's been helping them out to move forward. Um, the one thing I would say is it's all well and good talking about fabric and have fun. I think the hardest thing for execs and leadership is when times are tough, how do you make sure you keep delivering on those, on that culture? Because a lot of it is easier, but to make sure you're still having fun is really difficult. We did things in the business that, because as a startup, you can't attract people with a high salary. Um, Sometimes they're working exceedingly hard in a startup. So things that we did put in place were making sure that we actually had a training budget for the team, because if they feel that their career is still developing within the organization, that's attractive to them. Um, I also signed them up for different peer groups. So I'm a member of something called Pavilion, and it's a go-to-market networking group. And I signed up the whole team for that so they could start networking. So those are great, but we also used to get-togethers for team members. But in those times, and there will always be times in a startup where it's really tough, your numbers aren't quite what you wanted them to be, um, cash flow is tight, some of those drop by the wayside. That's some of my biggest regrets, because actually, when things are going well, you almost don't need to do some of those really positive things. But when things aren't going well, that's when you especially need those get-togethers and things like that. And if those drop off, then actually everyone's feeling under the cosh because it's so busy. They're feeling under pressure and they're not getting those releases. That's when people start to struggle more.
Makes sense. I always say hire for stormy seas.
Yeah, I think that one of the biggest challenges in a startup is hiring the right people. Um, and I know when we chatted on one of our previous sessions, one of my biggest regrets is we you've got limited budgets when you're a startup. And I've learnt later that you should not just hire cheaper resources. And I've listened to this from so many people that as a startup, save your money up and then hire that best resource you possibly can. Um, and in hindsight, that's what I would do now. In what we did was we built out from that founder area. I was the key salesperson. My CTO was the key pre-salesperson. We sold to some great accounts. Um, we realized that we could deliver value to our customers. We realized there was a product market fit. We now needed to start building out a repeatable model. And actually, I was thinking, well, let's create a team culture. Let's hire some younger SDRs that I can then train up. Um, they really understand the culture. They come into it. They stay with us. And I would say that's a 50-50 success. So I had two female sales execs or SDRs that moved all the way through the company, stayed with me for 4+ years, and they were truly exceptional. So that's success. The flip side to that is I probably went through 7 or 8 other SDRs. That took time for me to train them, cost of hiring. If I add up all of that amount, um, it would be a lot cheaper to hire a experienced number 2, a VP of sales. Um, and there's other topics around who I would hire, but I would have definitely done that and then maybe done the SDR function later. But there's swings and roundabouts. I also hired a probably a junior pre-sales person, guy called Jack Murray, who in the early days he was still getting his feet on the ground, but wow, he turned out to be probably the best hire within the business. He's become an absolute superstar. He's still with the business now, and honestly, a lot of the journey around raising money, selling the business and merging the business, I would not have been able to do without him, because every presentation we did to prospects, potential acquirers, pretty much every single one of them went, "Wow, we've never seen someone like him." And he started really early doors. So you have those stellar people that come into your company that grow within the company that actually are fundamental to the success of the company as well.
Yeah, interesting. I came from very much an environment like that, homegrown environment. I started as an SDR, became a business unit director, was in a business for 12 years, built my entire like career and all my skills within the company. And I was not exceptional. There was many examples of people like me who became senior people inside the business who all started on, £7 an hour doing SDR work. And so, but it's really hard. And we really struggle to hire externally because there was such a culture of promotion within, and we didn't really ever, I think, master what it took to go and hire the right external people inside the business during the time that I was there. They transitioned a lot since then. And obviously, I've now gone and done that as a professional career, but it was something that we really struggled with. So if I think about, we were really good at promoting internally, excellent, brilliant at developing people, very poor at hiring externally when we tried to spend a bit more to try and bring those skills into the business.
It's honestly one of the hardest jobs in the world because, and I've seen this with, we did it a tiny bit. I've seen nearly every other company do it. They either go off and hire a very experienced, say, VP of sales who knows the market, or they go off and hire a very experienced sales skilled VP, but maybe out of market. And the bits that they really don't, and maybe they do think about it, but maybe they just struggle to find that right person. The things that I've learned now is you've got to hire a person initially from your sector. They really need to understand, and this is more of a startup, an early stage growth company, because you don't have the time to train them. You need them up and running quickly. So they need to know your sector. They really need to know who your competitors are, your value proposition. They've also got to have been in a company of roughly the same sales stage, because if they've come from a larger company, quite often that larger company has fairly regular revenue. Forecasting is very consistent. The quarterly revenue is fairly consistent, which means their commission is pretty consistent. If you look at a startup or early stage growth company, forecasting is not as accurate. The revenue coming in is very lumpy, which means their commission checks are very lumpy. And then the third thing I always try and look at is, and this is harder to get your finger on the pulse, but how financially independent are they? Do they absolutely need that commission to live each month? Or actually, can they do without it and be more focused on these share options? Because to find that right VP of sales, they've got to know the market, they've got to be truly passionate, they've really got to understand the journey that they're going to be going on. And actually, they're more interested in that pot of gold, those shares at the end, rather than having to make commission every single month. Because if it is commission every single month, that won't happen in a great company. So you're going to have difficult conversations with that VP regularly where they go, I need more money. I need more base because I can't live without commission. And actually, what you want is almost like a co-founder where there is equity, so that they can buy into it. And the other thing that I did, and the jury's still out on this, me and the other two directors set up a share scheme for every employee. We carved out 10%. We didn't use all of that up by the time we exited, but it meant that every single employee got some shares. Now, the funny thing is, in the early days, that was really inspiring to the team because they really felt part of the company. The interesting point is, after about beyond that first startup phase, where we'd worked really hard for those first 3 years, we'd be moving into the growth phase, everyone loved that their shares were getting more valuable. When we went into the growth phase and we were hiring a slightly different type of employee, actually, they probably didn't see the value in the shares as much. Maybe it was more expected, but they didn't see the driving force of putting everything into it to increase the value of the company. So the share scheme was really good and important in the early days. It lost some of its drive probably in the growth phase.
Yeah, fascinating, interesting. Yeah, expectations are hard to keep. What I'm curious around is, funny because we laugh at the word curious now. What I'm inquisitive about is there was this whole chapter before you did this transition, which is what we're talking about today. This transition from being the founder who's selling everything, building everything, you've got all that on your shoulders, and then you go and transition out. What was that chapter like of the business where you were the founder who was master and chief and, doing everything?
Painful is probably the first word. I think as a founder, and that sales-led founder, you live and breathe selling to your initial customers. It's exciting being involved in all of those deals. And you're at a crossroads because you understand to scale the business, you can't be the only one selling this, and you've got to create a repeatable model. But also for someone who adores sales, it's also quite painful to step back and not be involved in all of those sales. So honestly, and I'll be totally upfront, it was a bit of an emotional roller coaster that I knew I had to let go, but also I didn't want to. And also the first VP of sales we hired, back to the points I made, they've got to understand the industry, products, blah, blah, blah. I brought in someone who was fantastic at developing a BDR team and very good at sales, didn't know the industry. So actually, I sat there going, I don't really want to let go because I don't think they're doing it as well as me. But two things I learned at that point. One, I will need to bring in a VP of sales, a CRO who really knows the industry. And actually, I did. I found a person called Neil Titcomb, absolute stunning. Been in the industry 20 years, still huge amount of passion. But the other thing that I realized was the reason I could sell is all of my background knowledge and my sales process. What I hadn't done was put that down on paper and create a proper sales playbook for my team. So in the early days of transitioning, I was expecting them to do it, and then in my own mind get frustrated when they weren't selling or following the process that I hadn't documented, which is slightly mad. Um, so actually, I needed to take a step back and build out that playbook and also really refine our ideal customer profile. In those early days, we started off super focused. Then we got into the world of excitement where people were knocking on our doors and we were going after all of the deals. And actually, some of those deals were too small or far too large, and we'd lost our focus. So that's why, firstly, I think you've got to have a lot more regular quarterly offsites where you just reset what's working, what isn't. Are we truly going after that ideal customer profile? But then build out that repeatable playbook. So if your sales process is you qualify it, then you maybe have to do a proof of concept when you've got that exec commitment, then build that into your process. But also, one thing that I saw in our business, our success rate on proof of values was amazing. We were closing 3 out of 4 where we'd done a proof of concept. Fast forward 6 months later, when I'd handed over the reins, we were closing 1 out of every 4 proof of concepts, and quickly looked to the playbook. And it's because we've been doing so well with proof of concepts, we were now offering them a lot earlier in the sales process and wasting time and then losing them. So you don't just want to build a process, you've got to have those gates in and out. You've got to have a qualification process like MedPick or Medic.
Yeah.
And I had not built a really robust playbook with gates in and out. And that's why the team were just trying to shortcut to get to a POV because they knew it closed 75% of the time.
Yeah. It's like having this amazing play that you want to use all the time, but actually what makes that play effective is we've done these things to realize it's the right play to execute.
100%. And it's the other thing that I've seen in other companies is just becoming too complex. Like our sales process had 4 key stages. I've gone into companies where they've got 7, 8 stages. They've detailed everything. They're calling it all wacky names that the poor salespeople have no idea what the hell is going on with the sales process. So simplicity is so much better than trying to overcomplicate.
Yeah, not
Um,
just for your own team sanity when they're trying to learn this stuff, but also for the customer, right? If your sales process is 15 stages, that buying process is an absolute nightmare.
and the other thing is uh, this market is shifting rapidly month to month, quarter to quarter. So the sales process that you put in place now has to keep evolving. Your customer profile might have to keep tweaking. The interesting thing is when we started as a startup business, 100% of our customers were direct. We were selling direct. Within about year 3, we were probably doing 60% direct, 40% through partners. And actually, when I exited and sold the business, we were probably doing 70 to 80% through partners and 20% direct. Now, it doesn't mean that suddenly all the direct business has gone away. It just means the direct business has gone up, but slowly our partner business has exploded because also at the buying techniques of buyers has changed. They're a lot more savvy, a lot more experienced. They're entering the buyer journey a lot further down the line. And also, these partners, these organizations, they already have relationships with the people that you want to sell to. So if you can build partnerships with the people that own those customer relationships, it's so much easier to sell to. But it takes a lot of work to get into those partners.
There's something to talk about that because I'm curious. My growth strategy for year 3 of my business is scale through partnerships, but we'll cover that later. What I'm curious about is at what point in your business, so if we think about whether it was number of customers or the revenue, the team size, what was that journey from starting the business to actually being ready to transition from founder-led sales? What did that look like?
Yeah, so for me, it is totally when you've got X amount of customers. Because, and the reason I say that, COVID totally threw a wrench into that time frame. Normally, you need to show that you've got a product market fit, which means you've got a 3, 5 Lighthouse customers on board, showing that you're delivering an ROI to those customers before you start going, okay, now we need to create a repeatable model, bring in some VP of sales or sales manager, and then build that playbook that you can then test to make sure it's a repeatable model. Interestingly, because of us through COVID, we had a few small customers, but we won the NHS, the Test and Trace Contact Center project, that was huge. So great customer, multi-million-dollar contract, fantastic revenue for the company, but it meant that the whole company focused on that project, and it wasn't repeatable. We weren't going to sign 5 more of those type of customers. So that was a total anomaly that gave us revenue. But as soon as we came out of COVID, we had to refine our ICP, look and sell to those Lighthouse accounts. And so it probably took us around 3 years until we needed to bring on that VP of sales and then build that predictable model out.
Yeah, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it's the agility part you mentioned, and it's like there's massive gold rush here we could do, but we're going to have to pivot the whole company. That's a decision point to go and make, isn't it? But you did it, and what did you get from that? Obviously, I know you talked about it was significant in terms of revenue, but what did the business gain by making that strategic decision to go all in on a non-ICP customer?
Yeah, so if you think back to those days, a lot of companies were literally furloughing all of their team. Our decision back then was a few things. One, we wanted all of our team to carry on working. So we spent a lot of time with the go-to-market team, training, refining ICP, practicing presentations, doing some type of lead gen activities so that when we came out of COVID and it started opening up again, our team were absolutely at their peak and ready to go for it, rather than coming back off furlough, taking 3 months, 4 months to get back into it. And it really meant as soon as COVID stopped, we super accelerated. The other thing it did from the technical point of view, all of our customers were in their hundreds of users, maybe 800 users. This was 10,500 users. We were being benchmarked against Salesforce. So our product, from a technical point of view, was absolutely shown that it can handle any type of size. So as we came out of that, and we actually also won some enterprise customers off the back of it, they went, "Oh, what's the largest customer you've worked with?" And we showed the data, and they're like, "Okay, yeah, we're nothing like that. You can handle whatever we can throw at you then." So it gave that real assurance to those bigger customers.
Fascinating. We talked about culture at the beginning in terms of the first principles and obviously your fabric model. If we think about as your business scaled, and obviously we're talking about that transition from founder-led sales, what have you learned about how to protect that culture that made you special in the first place as you start to scale the business?
Yeah, there's a few things is as you scale, you need to hire people quicker. And I think as we definitely came out of that phase where we started scaling, we probably shortcut some of our recruitment processes. And whereas before we'd always hired perfect fits from a technology point of view, sales skills point of view, but cultural point of view, honestly, we let it slip. And it's amazing. Um, if you bring people in that are a really poor cultural fit, it can do so much damage to your business. Um, and yet again, we were a very valued based company. So those one or two hires at the beginning, we also didn't act quickly enough. We let them stay, try and change them into the business. And actually, unfortunately, if they're not the right type of person, you need to make a change really quickly. So making sure that you make that change and only bring really good cultural fits into your business is so important. So don't ever just for don't ever hire just for skills. It's got to be hard for those people that are a good fit. Um, I mentioned earlier, you've got to invest in your team consistently, um, and some of those are promotions as well. Because the other tough thing in a small company, you don't have 500 people. You don't have all these different line managers. Um, so initially, I was thinking, well, there's no point doing a promotion because you're not actually moving them into a different role. But that's because I was a bit naive. I didn't think about how people would react by their title changing on LinkedIn, their title changing in front of their friends, peers, and this type of thing. And so actually, and it doesn't mean just give a new title for the sheer fun of it, but the thing that we were a bit slow at doing, and some of the people that came in really opened my eyes to this, build out a whole plan on hierarchy and different roles that people can go into, but also give them targets about how to get to that role. So it's not all about just doing the job, it's how can they keep improving in their journey and in their career, and how can they see to be able to move up. And that really helped because it meant that actually everyone could see their roles and pay increasing through by achieving different things within the business.
So I'm curious. You mentioned, not hiring assholes, making sure that you're hiring the right sort of people. I believe that there are four types of hires in every business in terms of the impact they have on your business: adders, subtractors, dividers, and multipliers. Mathematical equation. The
Yeah.
hiring line is that we only should hire adders and multipliers, but a lot of businesses hire subtractors. Just a bad hire. You got it totally wrong. Get them out. But dividers is like the high performing jerk, often the arsehole, often protected in businesses. They don't want to let them go because they maybe own the biggest accounts, maybe they deliver the most revenue, but from a behavioral and attitudinal point of view, they're setting such a bad precedent around what's expected and what is tolerated, and what makes you get kudos and respect and promotion within a company. You have to get them out, but so many businesses don't do that. So I'm wondering, when you talk about when you've got hiring wrong, what is some of that attitudinal and cultural misalignment that you realized just is not going to work for you?
Yeah, it's God, I could do a whole nother podcast just about that. But I will really give you the summaries. So interestingly, we had someone who was a really high flyer, um, delivering really well, but actually really putting up the backs of so many other people within the team. And it wasn't so much because they were just performing, they'd potentially become just a bit too dogmatic and almost a bit too big for their boots. So very demanding. And now, maybe in a bigger company, you can have that because you can move them around a bit. But in a small company, you can't have that. And you've got to have that ethos within a company, in a startup or growth company, that you're never too big to do a job within the business. The amount of times that when we moved office, I was putting up tables. If the floor was dirty, I vacuumed the floor because the cleaner wasn't coming in for a few days. I don't care what job I'm doing. And I hope people see that. But certain people, or yeah, people just got a bit too big for their boots. Now, did I think they were having as much effect as they were? No, I didn't. It was only after they left, about 3 or 4 people suddenly grew in stature and suddenly started performing probably 40%, 50% better than I could have ever imagined. And that's because they were either feeling that downtrodden by that person, or just feeling like, oh, they always get the best stuff. They're always the favorites, blah, blah, blah. And it really showed those other people coming up. The other thing is just the wrong type of attitudes. So I had one person who came on board, said they were a hard worker, blah, blah, blah. And the first 2 months, they would saunter in at 10:30 in the morning. They'd leave early, they'd go for long lunches. And literally everyone started coming to me going, "This person is just, they're not even pulling their weight. I don't know what they're doing." And yet again, if I had left them, then actually other people get, "Well, God, if they're allowed to do it, I can." Then making a shift quickly showed, good. We all know what standard we're supposed to work to. And actually, if you don't, that's what happens. So not a stick, but it was lovely that it was a team coming to me first rather than me having to do something.
Yeah. I think it has to be that both sides. It can't just be the leadership protecting the culture. It has to be the people protecting the culture. Because what is culture? It's that set of values and beliefs and standards that a community of people hold. So it can't be top down. It has to be, this is what it means to be in this company. If we're off, we have to self-correct, because otherwise it's like this parent-child relationship, right?
I agree that the hardest one to change is the person who is an amazing person, great energy, great team player, but unfortunately, either due to they just don't have enough knowledge in an area, who just isn't performing in that go-to-market team. And unfortunately, there was 1 or 2 along the way that, God, if I could have kept them in purely for the culture of the company, I would have loved to have kept them in. But unfortunately, they just weren't performing quite well enough for where we needed to be. They are probably the ones that I find the hardest to move on.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I agree. Well, I think it's the adder line. They're adding value, but not exactly in where you need it to be. They're not going to become a force multiplier, drive like massive impact and bring other people with them. It's really hard. In larger businesses, you can often move those into, like, you could create roles for them, couldn't you? You're in charge of, employee love and, culture and events and things like that. In a startup, everyone has to carry their weight, because it's resourcefulness that we need, not ultimate resources.
100%. In a bigger company, I would have always found a place for them. It's
Yeah.
a shame.
Yeah, I'm sure they're honestly, they're better off in a new environment where they are being successful. I'm
Yeah.
curious, because you did something that a lot of companies which really struggle to do, which is you broke the US market. You managed to do that successfully. What's the story of your US expansion?
So there's yet again 2 sides to this. So firstly, in the area that I operated in, this CX space, the US was probably about a fifth of the size of the UK was about a fifth of the size of the US. So the US I always knew was a great market for us. Also in my space, the US were better at adopting new and modern technology. So I knew it was a good fit. And also, they really do like the English. And that's from my experience working in the past. As long as you're credible, they really do like buying from English organizations. The flip side to that is I've been to too many companies where they do a fundraise, they get X amount of million, and they just hire a big boss in the US. They hire X amount of salespeople, and they burn through the cash and give it a year or two down the line. They've picked up one or two customers, all the team's gone, and they're in the same position as they were, but they burnt through millions of pounds. So I knew I needed to get there, but I also knew that we couldn't spend a lot of money breaking into it. You mentioned something which I absolutely loved. It's how do you approach an expansion like a product launch rather than just a hiring sprint? And it's so spot on. When you think about going to the US, you're thinking about I need to build a full plan around it. I've got to think about product marketing. How do I do the pricing, the positioning, naming conventions? There's a thing in contact center. So if you think about center in the UK, it's spelt CNTRE. In the US, it's CMTER. So if you do loads of marketing, spell it wrong, the US go, they really don't understand our market. So a lot around that. Also finance. How do you bill? How do you do all these things? And the final bit was, how do I support them from the UK without having to put people over there in the short term? So I'm thinking, where are the contact centers in that area? I ideally want to go East Coast, maybe Central, so it's got the most overlap with time zones. And also, I've also seen over many years, you can't just dip your toe in, because the American companies will sit there waiting to see, are you going to keep coming back, or are you just going to try it and then bail out because it doesn't work? So even though my team probably didn't love me for it, every couple of months we would pack a few suitcases. We'd go to some trade shows over there. We'd put all of the stand in those suitcases. We'd fly over there. We'd be getting tables delivered via Amazon and stuff like that. And we would put up a super professional stand. So we looked like we were a lot bigger than we were over there. We would consistently go to these events, purposely do it as cheap as possible, so get the smallest space, but we would be there. And we would make sure we always went with a team of 2 or 3, and we were just very visible. For every evening event, we would turn up in full branded kit so that wherever these people looked, they always saw us. And it probably took about 9 months of just being there that then everyone starts going, "Oh, we saw you at the last event. We saw you." And we're like, "Yes, yeah, we're always over here." And then they started trusting us. The other thing, which was a bit of perfect timing, which you don't often say about COVID, is before COVID, everyone in America expected the Americans to fly around and visit them for these demonstrations and presentations. COVID changed that whole dynamic so that now people from the East Coast of America would not fly to the West Coast to do a presentation. So it didn't matter that we were doing presentations from the UK as long as we still visited them. And we would always focus on, if it was a good opportunity, we would visit them first up, get to know them, build relationships with them, take them out for dinner, and then we would do everything else remotely. But you'd already built that relationship with them.
I love that.
And we were able to get the first, we initially did 5 Lighthouse accounts into the US, all from just traveling back and forwards. And then we thought, okay, we might put someone here. And then it actually exploded. So we actually got our first 15, 20 accounts without having anyone on the actually based over there.
Wow.
Although my team did, I think, complain a lot that we were just flying economy over there, staying in fairly cheap hotels. I'm a very cost-effective CEO. But it meant that suddenly we had a really good base over there. We handled the support with a 24-hour contact center and then triaging if it was priority 1 issues, and then passing them off to a 24-hour engineer. But actually, most of our customers said to us, you deliver a better service than our American companies that we do business with. And that's what we prided ourselves on.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. I'm interested to understand a bit about this. So you're talking about this very like lean mindset into growing into the US. And I love how you did it through, if people see us in person and we build those relationships with people, we know we can run the sales process and the strategy around our communication in a way that's going to mean that that doesn't matter as much, because we've broken down these walls through COVID and all that sort of stuff, but we still have to have that in-person relationship with people. That's a large investment of time, a lot of team effort to go and create those relationships. But it's such an interesting way of doing it, because I've not heard it before. I remember when you first told me that around like taking these massive stands, so you look like this really big company out there. But most people go, we need to put some boots on the ground, and then like you've got to go and build the book, and you've got to go and create the market, but they don't really have that resources. But you kind of went like, we're going to send, it makes me think of like sending like the Armada, take the boats, take the resources out there. We're going to like make sure people see us, plant some flags. But that was a really big company effort. Where did that idea around this strategy around doing the events, building the relationships in person come from?
Yeah, so it was me testing the market. So the interesting thing was twofold. I've worked in a few different sectors before I got to this space. And the contact center CX space market, events are still very well recognized and highly regarded. That is not the same case in other markets. So it was well recognized. The other thing that I did was not just go to events. I would always spend a bit more money, but always have a speaking slot at an event. And the speaking slots I did was never just about selling our technology, or hardly about selling our technology. It was always trying to be seen as that trusted advisor and talk about what was being seen in the UK, US. Every time I spoke to a customer, I'd ask them what they were seeing. So I was always reiterating back what I'd found out. And so a lot of people would come to my talks because they found them as really great for information, helping them start making decisions on where they should go with technology. But because I was seen as more of that trusted advisor, then it helped build the company as well and our standing. The second piece is, just because most of the companies I worked for prior, I've run the US markets. And what always made me chuckle sarcastically was, I might be running a team, say, for the whole channel globally, but my US counterparts would earn way more than me. So I'm sitting there going, if I hire a US person, that's going to cost an arm and a leg. Whereas actually, even if we fly over every other month, stay in hotels for a week or whatever, the return on investment for us is still absolutely huge. Now, the one thing I would say is, you don't want to force your team to do that. So yet again, I was carefully in either on our delivery team, working out who actually wanted to travel. And we had one guy who adored going overseas. Every time we had something, he'd be like, yes, please. So he was happy to go for a week or 2 weeks in the US or Canada. And then the team, the sales team, finding out who wanted to travel. In the early days, they loved it. I think as time went on, they probably got a bit bored of it. And honestly, by the end, I was probably in the US for a week or 10 days every month, which is hard work. And I remember some of the execs in our US partners going, geez, you travel more than I do. And it's a lot of effort, but it meant that we were able to grow so much quicker. And the final bit I'd say on that, for every $1 or £1 I was spending on a salary over there, if I could be spending it on more marketing activities, more development in the technology, all of those things to drive more business, it meant I could accelerate quicker. And if I look at my plan to just travel out there compared to hire out there, I was probably saving £100,000 a year, which meant £100,000 extra on marketing activities and things like that. It just gave us such a quicker acceleration.
So what was the revenue, or it doesn't have to be revenue, but what was the size and scale of the business at the point when you looked to break open the US? And then what sort of percentage of your revenue did you bet on the US expansion?
Yeah. So, God, we were probably around about £1 million turnover pounds when I went, okay, we could either carry on going in the UK and get double digit growth, which is nice, or I can really bet on the US with the limited money budgets, apart from travel expenses. Um, and that gave us for the following years triple digit growth because we went to the US. Now, the thing that it did do is pretty much 90% of our marketing budget went in North America. So actually, bizarrely, it meant the US became 70-80% of our business, but growing really strongly. Our UK business was really slow, really slow. But the funny thing is, when we had the SDR team and they targeted the US and UK markets, because the US are just more willing to take calls from people. If you've been to a show, they'll happily talk to you. UK people are naturally more conservative. Our hit rates and response rates from a callback point of view, it was double the actual callback rates in the US compared to the UK. So the BDRs, I'd much prefer to be calling to the US than the UK, even though they were based in the UK.
Yeah, amazing. I know our listeners will go crazy if I don't ask you the question about the partnership side, because it became such a big accelerant for you. Talk us through that strategy you had around building partnerships.
Yeah, so my background is I did about 15 years running channels for technology companies globally, but also small ones. So I've always learned that the partnerships can give that real accelerator effect to a business. But if you don't do it correctly, then it can just be you can put a pot of money in there and nothing happens. Um, so the one thing I always learn early on is you've got to start talking to partners early, because to get a highly effective partnership off the ground and running can often take 2 years. So if you only start looking at partners when you really want to be using them, you're already 2 years behind. So my sales team just sold direct. They went after direct, but I started going after those bigger partnerships and kicking off those conversations yet again, probably in year 2 of the business, expecting it might take another 2 years till they were really operational. Um, and it's the other thing is there's so many reports out nowadays that the two highest lead conversion channels are partnerships and referrals, customer referrals. So slight thing I did was also put in a referral program for our customers. So if they do refer them, how can we give something back? It could be free hours that they can then use to configure their platform, those type of things, or further discounts on new stuff that they buy because they've referred customers. But the partnerships, I always look at it in regards to, is it technology platforms that you might want to integrate to that you can get onto their marketplaces? Is it resellers that might resell your technology, or they might be reselling that other platform that you can be an added part of it? Or also, is there consultants out there that you can then be sign referral agreements with those? The referral agreements are obviously quite quick to deliver on. The resellers are harder, but still quicker. The hardest ones are those technology partnerships. It might be very easy to become just on their marketplace, which gives a tiny bit of a benefit, but to actually get in with them where they're reselling your product. And the nirvana is when they're not just reselling your product, but their sales teams are compensated on selling your products. That is when it can shift everything. And we had, by the end, probably about 3 of those, but one major one, 8x8, where their whole sales force of hundreds of reps could sell our solution and be compensated for selling our solution. That suddenly just accelerates your revenue. Very, very good triple-digit growth.
Yeah, amazing, amazing. And then just bringing it full circle, obviously I saw, you've just announced it on LinkedIn that you have exited. So just talk us through what you can share around how this story that we've been sharing has concluded from your side.
Yeah, it's been an exciting journey. So if I look, we created Awaken Intelligence. After 5 years, we sat there and went, okay, we built out a US market, but we really do need to start having a US team over there. And it was at the time when we were going for Series A investment. And I actually met a CEO from another company with technology that was a really good dovetail into ours. So we actually made the decision about 18 months ago in mid 2024 to merge with a US company and then rebrand both companies under a new name called CareerVi that no one could ever pronounce, which was fun and games. But it meant that suddenly we had double the revenue, double the size of the company. But our plan then was both of our organizations were getting a lot of interest from those strategic technology companies that potentially wanted to acquire us. So what we really focused on then was, okay, let's take these two companies together, integrate them seamlessly, really push on growing the revenue strongly, and then that will make us a lot more appealing to one of those strategic players. So back in September of last year, the company was acquired by a company called Capacity. They're a large platform play in the CX space. And apart from being a fantastic home for our solutions and also for our employees, the other fantastic thing is their CEO, a guy called David, is just truly inspirational. He's one of those guys that very technical, but very commercial as well. I've only met a few of them in my life where you're almost talking to them and their brain is running even faster than you can even talk to them at. And he sold his first business for just under $1 billion. And he's now really trying to change the CX space by bringing together different companies and really trying to change the market. So very exciting for me, Chris, and Joffrey as founders, but also really happy because when you sell a company, you also, back to culture, you want to make sure that your employees have a safe place to be in and also a place where they can grow. What you don't want to do is sell to a company where they then get rid of half of your team.
Sure.
So even though the other directors have left, like I have, and left the business, all of our employees have a really safe place to then continue growing their careers within that business.
So you've completed what every founder dreams of, which is a successful exit where your team are left in a better place and, lots of people have won as a result of it. What's the unfinished business in your career? What are you thinking about this unresolved that you still want to tackle before you call it a day?
So I spoke to a company yesterday. So we did some really good things along the way. So if I think, actually, Chris, one of my founders, always said, don't ever set a budget. Work out what money you need to do a specific thing, and then we'll do that. If you set a budget, people will just spend to that budget. So when we created the systems within our startup, we didn't just go with a Salesforce and this and that, because we could have spent tens of thousands of pounds on these systems. So we looked, what systems could we bring in that were very cost effective but deliver a great job? And compared to other businesses I've seen, our technology spend was probably a tenth of some of those companies. So very cost effective. So we were always great at that area. But also I made a huge amount of errors, mistakes, and things like that. I overspent on hiring. I definitely went down a more junior hiring route that stunted our growth in the early days. And if I knew then what I know now, I really do think I could have probably done it in half the time and probably got about a double the exit. So, and I'm one that's super ambitious and just, I'm also too young. I'm always wanting, as I said, I get bored easily to do something new. So I'm looking to go back in and just do something and grow something a lot quicker. Now, do I want to start up right from the beginning? No, I don't think I've got quite the energy to do that again. Do I want to go into that organization that's just got over that product market fit, million turnover? They really want to start scaling, go into the US market, 100%. And I also want to prove to me and the other directors that we can do it a lot quicker, a lot more efficiently, and get that better return. Because even in negotiating, when you need extra funds, when you want to go through that merger, when you want to go through that exit and get acquired, there are so many little lessons I've learned all the way. It would be awful if I didn't get to use that experience to do something better next time.
Wow, what an opportunity for someone, right?
Yeah, no, exactly.
Good man. If anyone wants to speak to Simon while he's in this, the exploratory phase of looking for that next challenge to do it faster and bigger and better than before, then would you say LinkedIn? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
Yeah, definitely LinkedIn. Simon Black at LinkedIn.
We'll put a link in the show notes. Simon, you're a true gen. On top of being Littlehampton's finest, represent LA, the true LA.
Moving by the place.
Yeah, I love hearing your story. So thank you so much for sharing your story and your expertise. I know a lot of people will have got a lot of value from it. So thank you.
No, thank you, Richard. It's been great to get to know you over the last couple of months.
For sure. Everyone else, we will see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening. And if you enjoyed this conversation, we've got a newsletter called Growth Magnet on LinkedIn, where we take the best insights from all of these episodes and turn them into bite-sized format for you to enjoy.